On Thanksgiving Day, I arrived at my daughter's house unannounced and saw my grandson shivering outside in 15-degree weather, wearing only a t-shirt and shorts. Inside, the whole family was sitting at the holiday table, enjoying turkey and laughing in the warmth. Enraged by their betrayal, I kicked down the door and uttered 6 words that made their faces turn pale. But that was only the beginning of the justice that changed their lives forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. A text from my neighbor. Saw police cars at the Hendersons again. Domestic situation. Made me think of you and your family worries. I stared at those words while my old Chevrolet idled in the driveway. The Hendersons. Martha used to worry about their grandson too, back when she was still alive, to worry about anything at all. Now it was just me, and that gnawing feeling in my gut whenever I thought about Leona's marriage. The clock read 2:30 p.m. Time to go. I shifted into reverse and backed out onto Miller Street. Snow had started falling an hour ago, fat flakes that stuck to everything and made the roads treacherous. The radio crackled with weather warnings as I turned onto I-75 south toward Cincinnati. Classical rock station, same one Martha and I always listened to. Led Zeppelin was playing something heavy that matched my mood. The passenger seat held 2 gift bags, one with a new baseball glove for Amos, genuine leather that cost me more than I wanted to spend. The other had comic books, the kind with superheroes he'd been reading since he was 12. Now 18, he probably thought he was too old for them, but I remembered being 18. You're never too old for heroes. Family is all we have left, Martha used to say when she'd catch me grumbling about holiday visits. She'd been right then, and she was right now, even though her voice only existed in my memory. After losing her 6 months ago, every gathering felt precious and fragile. The windshield wipers struggled against the accumulating snow. Other cars crawled along at half the speed limit, hazard lights blinking like nervous fireflies. I kept both hands on the wheel and maintained a steady 40 miles per hour. No point arriving at all if I ended up in a ditch. Exit signs counted down the miles to Cincinnati. I tried calling Leona's house, wanted to let them know I was coming, maybe surprise them less dramatically than just showing up. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Strange. Usually someone was home on Thanksgiving afternoon. A gas station appeared through the snow, bright fluorescent lights cutting through the gray afternoon like a lighthouse. I pulled in, filled the tank, and went inside to grab some coffee and a bag of those peppermints Amos liked. The clerk, a young guy with tired eyes, shook his head at the weather. "Roads are getting worse by the hour," he said, scanning my items. "You driving far?" "Just to Cincinnati. Family dinner. Be careful out there. Saw 3 accidents already today." Back in the truck, I checked the time again. 3:05 p.m. The drive usually took 45 minutes, but today it would be closer to an hour. I thought about Amos, probably helping his mother in the kitchen, maybe watching football with Wilbur. The boy had grown so much since summer when we went fishing at Lake Erie. Caught his first base that day, grinned like he'd won the lottery. That's when I'd noticed the bruise on his arm. When I asked about it, he'd gotten quiet, said something about falling off his bike. But the mark looked wrong. Too precise, too much like fingers. I should have pressed harder, should have asked more questions. Martha would have known what to do. The snow kept falling as I took exit 15 toward Leona's neighborhood. Suburban streets lined with 2-story houses, each one decorated with pumpkins and autumn wreaths. Christmas lights were already going up on some of them, twinkling through the white curtain of snow. I turned into Maple Grove subdivision, driving slowly past houses where families were probably gathered around dining tables, sharing stories and passing dishes. Warm light spilled from windows, creating golden rectangles on snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a good day, a healing day. Martha would have wanted that. Leona's street appeared ahead, and I could see her house at the end of the block. The blue 2-story with white shutters, Wilbur's pickup in the driveway next to her sedan. Smoke rose from the chimney, and holiday decorations covered the front porch. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. I slowed the truck as I approached, already imagining the surprise on their faces when I knocked on the door. Maybe Amos would run to hug me like he used to when he was smaller. Maybe this Thanksgiving would be the start of healing our family the way Martha always dreamed it could be. I pulled into the driveway behind Wilbur's truck, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the falling snow, I could see holiday lights twinkling around the front door and hear faint music from inside the house. Something warm and inviting, like a Norman Rockwell painting come to life. Then I saw him. Amos sat on the front steps, hunched over with his arms wrapped around his knees. No coat, no hat, just a thin long-sleeved shirt and jeans, already dusted with snow. His shoulders shook, not just from cold, but something deeper. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, throwing open the truck door. The wind hit me like a slap, carrying ice crystals that stung my face. In the few seconds it took me to reach him, I could see his lips had turned blue, and his hands were pressed tight against his body, trying to conserve warmth. "Amos!" I called out, breaking into a run across the slippery driveway. "What are you doing out here?" He looked up, and the relief in his eyes nearly broke my heart. His face was pale, almost gray, with red patches on his cheeks, where the cold had bitten deepest. "Grandpa?" His voice came out as barely a whisper, teeth chattering so hard he could barely form words. I can't." I was already pulling off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it around his shoulders before he could finish the sentence. The boy was ice cold, his whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. "What do you mean you can't? Can't what?" I helped him stand, steadying him when his legs nearly buckled. "How long have you been sitting out here?" "I'm not allowed." He pulled my coat tighter around himself, and I could feel him shaking through the thick fabric. "I'm not allowed to go in the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind us, through the brightly lit windows, I could hear laughter and the sound of a television. The warm glow of family celebration, while my grandson sat freezing on the front steps like some kind of punishment. "What do you mean, not allowed?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but anger was building in my chest like a fire. "This is your home." Amos flinched at my tone, and I immediately softened it. The last thing he needed was another adult yelling at him. "Please don't make it worse for me," he whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. "Please, Grandpa. If Wilbur hears you—" I looked at the house, really looked at it, the decorations, the warm lights, the sounds of celebration. Then I looked at my grandson, blue-lipped and shivering in clothes that wouldn't keep him warm in 50-degree weather, let alone this near-freezing nightmare. "How long, Amos?" I kept my voice gentle but firm. "How long have you been out here?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. Since this morning." "This morning?" I checked my watch. 3:15. "Son, it's below freezing out here. You could get frostbite. You could—" I stopped myself before I scared him worse than he already was. I tried the front door handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. They'd locked him out of his own home on Thanksgiving Day and left him to freeze while they enjoyed their holiday dinner. "We need to get you warm," I said, guiding him toward my truck. "Come on, let's get you in the cab where there's heat." But even as I moved to protect him, my mind was working, cataloging details. The way he'd flinched when I raised my voice, the bruises I'd noticed during our fishing trip, the careful way he moved, like someone who'd learned to make himself small and invisible. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. "Amos," I said, as I helped him into the passenger seat and turned the heat to maximum, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened today." I cranked the heat to full blast and wrapped another blanket from my emergency kit around Amos's shoulders. His hands were so numb he couldn't grip anything properly, so I held them between mine, trying to rub warmth back into his fingers. "Talk to me, son," I said, keeping my voice steady, despite the rage building in my chest. "What happened this morning?" He stared down at his hands, still shaking. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to check on it while she took a shower." His voice was small, ashamed. I forgot to turn off the oven timer when I took it out to baste it." "You forgot a timer?" "The turkey got a little burnt on top. Not ruined, just darker than usual." He finally looked at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Wilbur came in and saw it, and he lost it." I felt my jaw clench. Lost it how? Started yelling about how I'd ruined the whole holiday. Said the guests would think Mom couldn't cook. That I was an embarrassment to the family. Amos pulled the blanket tighter. Then he said I needed to think about my actions, and that I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned some responsibility. And your mother? The question came out harder than I intended. Amos looked away. She tried to say something at first, but Wilbur told her to stay out of it, said this was between him and me. He swallowed hard. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch again. 3:20. Amos, what time did this happen? Around 11 this morning. 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours in weather that could kill someone, over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted just fine. I had to take several deep breaths before I could speak without shouting. Has this happened before? The question hung in the air between us. I could see him wrestling with whether to tell me the truth, probably weighing the consequences of honesty against the relief of finally having someone to tell. Sometimes, he whispered, when I mess up. Last month he made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to take out the trash. And once he locked me in the basement for 2 days because I accidentally broke one of his beer bottles. Each word felt like a punch to my gut. I looked at my grandson, this smart, kind boy who'd never hurt anyone in his life, and saw the careful way he held himself, like someone who'd learned that taking up too much space could be dangerous. Your mother knows about this? She says Wilbur's just trying to teach me discipline, that I need to be more responsible. His voice cracked. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just... Don't. I turned in the seat to face him fully. Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that man is doing to you isn't discipline. It's abuse. And it's going to stop today. Amos's eyes went wide with panic. No, Grandpa. Please. If you make a scene, he'll just take it out on me later. He always does. I could see the house through the windshield, still glowing warm and inviting, still full of laughter and holiday music. Inside, my daughter was serving dinner to guests while her husband's stepson sat freezing in a truck, too afraid to ask for basic human decency. Listen to me, I said, taking his hands again. You are 18 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore, and I'm not going to let you. But where would I go? I don't have any money. I can't afford college without... You'll come home with me. Tonight. The decision crystallized as I spoke. We'll figure out the rest later. I could see the hope and terror warring in his expression. Hope because maybe, finally, someone was going to stand up for him. Terror because he'd learned not to trust that things could actually get better. He won't let me leave, Amos said quietly. He'll call the police. Say I stole something or that you're kidnapping me. I looked at the house again, at the warm lights and holiday decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Martha had always been the diplomatic one, the one who smoothed over family conflicts with patience and understanding. But Martha wasn't here anymore, and diplomacy hadn't protected my grandson from 4 hours in near-freezing weather. Let me worry about Wilbur, I said, opening the truck door. Right now, we're going to get your things. I stepped out into the snow, my boots crunching on the accumulating white. Behind me, I heard Amos scramble to follow, my coat still wrapped around his shoulders. The front door was still locked, but I had no intention of knocking. I held Amos closer, but my hands weren't just shaking from the cold anymore. They were shaking with the kind of rage that builds slowly, then hits like a freight train when you finally see the whole picture. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, studying his face more carefully. Now that I was really looking, I could see faint bruises along his jawline, partially hidden by the shadows and cold reddened skin. I tried to hint, he whispered, pulling my coat tighter. But you always talk to Mom, and she... The memory hit me like a slap. Last month, when Amos had called while I was fixing dinner, his voice small and uncertain. Grandpa, Wilbur says I can't eat dinner with them anymore. Says I have to earn my way back to the table. I'd laughed it off, thought it was teenage drama. Called Leona the next day, and she'd brushed it aside with that practiced ease she'd developed since marrying Wilbur. Dad, you're overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Amos exaggerates everything. You know how teenagers are. Another memory surfaced. Summer phone call. Amos, sounding exhausted. Mom! Wilbur yelled at me again about leaving dishes in the sink. He made me wash every dish in the house twice. When I'd asked Leona about it later, she'd sighed that martyred sigh. He's just being dramatic. Wilbur's trying to teach him responsibility. How long has he been treating you like this? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would destroy me. Since Mom married him 3 years ago. Amos's voice was barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't perfect. Then it got worse. I remembered the fishing trip this past summer, how Amos had seemed reluctant to go home, kept asking if we could stay another day. When I'd pressed him about it, he'd just shrugged and said he liked being on the lake. But now I could see it differently. The way he'd grown quiet when I mentioned driving him back, the shadow that crossed his face when he talked about school starting. "The basement incident," I said, the pieces clicking together. "You mentioned sleeping in the garage. How many times?" "More than I want to count." He was looking at his hands now, and I could see the shame he carried. "Last winter he locked me out for forgetting to shovel the driveway. I slept in your truck when you visited for Christmas Eve." My truck. He'd slept in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside enjoying eggnog and thinking what a wonderful family holiday we were having. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. I looked toward the house where warm light spilled from every window and I could hear the faint sound of laughter. A perfect suburban holiday scene while my grandson nearly froze to death on the front steps. "Your mother knows about all of this?" Amos nodded miserably. "She says Wilbur's just trying to make me a better person, that I need to stop being so sensitive and learn to follow rules." The rage was building now, hot and focused. I could feel it in my chest, in the way my vision seemed to sharpen and narrow. Martha used to warn me about my temper, told me to count to 10 before acting when I got like this. But Martha wasn't here, and counting wouldn't help my grandson. I stood up, still keeping Amos wrapped in my coat. "Come on, we're going inside." "Grandpa, no. Please. If you make a scene, he'll just what?" I turned to face him fully. "Make you sleep outside in freezing weather? Beat you? Starve you?" I could hear my voice getting harder. "Son, it can't get much worse than what's already happening." Amos looked toward the front door with fear in his eyes. "You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him." But I was already walking toward the house, my grandson following reluctantly behind me. The front door looked solid and expensive, Wilbur's pride showing in every detail of his perfect suburban fortress. I didn't bother knocking. My boot hit the door just beside the lock with all the force I could muster. 68 years old, but decades of factory work had left me with more strength than most men half my age. The wood splintered with a crack that echoed through the neighborhood, and the door slammed open so hard it bounced off the wall. The warm air rushed out to meet us, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and the sound of shocked silence. I stepped into the entryway, Amos close behind me, and took in the scene that stopped me cold. The dining room table was set like something from a magazine. White tablecloth, candles flickering, crystal glasses catching the light. Wilbur sat at the head of the table in a pressed button-down shirt, carving knife in hand. Leona was beside him in a green dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled. A younger girl, maybe 10 years old, sat across from them with a forkful of mashed potatoes halfway to her mouth. They were all frozen mid-motion, like someone had hit pause on their perfect holiday moment. The contrast hit me like a physical blow. Here they sat, warm and comfortable, enjoying their feast while Amos had been shivering outside for over 4 hours. The turkey looked golden and beautiful, probably the replacement for the one Amos had supposedly ruined. Everything was pristine, peaceful, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should look like. Everything except the fact that they'd left a child outside to freeze. "Have you completely lost your minds?" My voice boomed through the room, and the little girl dropped her fork with a clatter. Leona's face went white as paper, and the serving spoon in her hand hit the table, sending gravy spattering across the white cloth. "Dad?" Leona's voice came out as a squeak. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "While you're sitting here feasting like royalty, that boy was freezing outside." I pointed directly at Amos, who was still wrapped in my coat and shivering despite the warm air. 4 hours, Leona. 4 hours in weather that could have killed him." Wilbur slowly set down his carving knife and rose from his chair. He was bigger than I remembered, probably outweighed me by 50 pounds, but I'd been in my share of fights when I was younger. Size didn't always matter when you were angry enough. "Who gave you permission to enter my house?" His voice was controlled but dangerous, the tone of a man who wasn't used to being challenged. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." I could see him taking my measure, calculating whether he could intimidate me into backing down. His chest puffed out slightly, and he moved around the table toward us with the predatory confidence of someone who ruled his own domain. "Private property," I stepped forward to meet him. "You mean the property where you locked my grandson outside to freeze while you ate dinner?" The younger daughter started crying, confused and frightened by the shouting. Leona reached over to comfort her, but her eyes never left my face. I could see the conflict there, torn between protecting her father and defending her husband. "This is a private family matter," Wilbur said, his voice rising. "And you have no business—" "No business?" I could feel the heat rising in my face. "That's my grandson you nearly killed with your private family matter." Behind me, Amos pressed closer, and I could feel him trembling. Not just from cold now, but from fear of what was about to happen. This was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Wilbur in his own house, and we all knew it was about to get ugly. The holiday music was still playing softly in the background, some cheerful song about gratitude and family togetherness. The irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed directly at Amos, my finger steady despite the rage coursing through me. "Look at him, Wilbur. Really look at what you've done." Wilbur crossed his arms and lifted his chin, every inch the man who believed he was justified in his actions. "The boy ruined our holiday. He needed to learn a lesson about responsibility and consequences." "A lesson?" I could barely believe what I was hearing. "You nearly froze a child to death over a slightly burnt turkey." "He's 18, not a child, and this is my house with my rules." Wilbur's voice took on that patronizing tone men use when they think they're being reasonable. "I'm trying to teach him discipline, something his mother obviously failed to do in his first 17 years. Leona flinched at that, but didn't say anything, just sat there in her green dress, looking between us like she was watching a tennis match instead of a fight for her son's welfare. "Discipline?" I stepped closer to the table, close enough to see the grease on Wilbur's plate, the wine stain on his lips. "That's called child abuse, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now." "Child abuse." Wilbur actually laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. "He forgot to turn off a timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I sent him outside to think about his actions. That's not abuse. That's parenting. For 4 hours, in 5-degree weather. He's being dramatic, just like always." Wilbur waved his hand dismissively, like he was shooing away a fly. "Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone." I looked at Amos, still wrapped in my coat, his lips blue and his whole body shaking. Fine? This man thought hypothermia was fine. "Dad, please," Leona finally spoke up, her voice shaky. "Don't ruin our holiday. We can discuss this later, as a family." "Ruin your holiday?" I turned to stare at my daughter. "Your son was sitting outside freezing while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday." She looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. Wilbur was he was trying to teach Amos responsibility. Sometimes boys need firm guidance. "Firm guidance?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "Leona, when you were 18 and you dented my truck, did I lock you outside in a blizzard? When you failed your math test, did I make you sleep in the garage?" "That's different," she whispered. "How? How is it different?" Wilbur stepped between us, his face red with anger. "Because this is my house, and Amos is not my biological son. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit." There it was. The truth finally out in the open. Amos wasn't his blood, so Amos didn't matter. The boy was nothing more than an inconvenience to be controlled and punished. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson," I said, my voice deadly quiet. 30 seconds to show some basic human decency. Wilbur's laugh was even colder this time. "I don't owe that boy anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can find somewhere else to live." The little girl was crying harder now, and Leona was making shushing noises, but I could barely hear them. All I could see was Wilbur's smug face. All I could think about was Amos sitting on those steps for 4 hours, believing he deserved it. Somewhere else to live? I stepped even closer, close enough to smell the wine on Wilbur's breath. "You're right about that. He is going somewhere else to live." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. The movement was deliberate. slow enough for everyone in the room to understand exactly what I was considering. Wilbur's face changed when he saw the phone. The smug confidence cracked just slightly around the edges. "Either you apologize to my grandson right now," I said, my voice deadly calm, "or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse." "You wouldn't dare." Wilbur stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. But I'd faced down bigger men than him in my day, and I wasn't backing down from anyone who hurt my family. "Try me." I started dialing the first number. "I've got plenty to tell them about leaving an 18-year-old outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. Behind me, Amos gripped my arm. I could feel him trembling, but not from cold anymore. This was fear of a different kind, the terror of someone who'd learned that standing up only made things worse. "Dad, please!" Leona finally moved, stepping between us with her hands raised like she was trying to stop a bar fight. "Don't destroy our family over this." "I'm not destroying anything." I kept my eyes locked on Wilbur. He did that when he decided to abuse my grandson. "Abuse?" Wilbur's laugh was harsh and bitter. "I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never bothered to do." Leona flinched like he'd slapped her, but she didn't defend herself, just stood there taking it, the way she probably always did. "Get out of my house, old man," Wilbur continued, his voice rising. "You have no authority here. Amos is my responsibility, now." "Your responsibility?" I looked around the perfect dining room, the crystal glasses, the fine china, the holiday centerpiece, then back at my grandson's bruised face. "Is this how you handle responsibility? Locking children outside to freeze?" The younger daughter was crying harder now, confused and frightened by the shouting. Leona moved to comfort her, but kept glancing between me and Wilbur like she was watching a tennis match where someone might die. "He's not a child. He's 18, Wilbur said, straightening his shoulders. "And in my house, adults who can't follow simple instructions face adult consequences." Adult consequences for forgetting to turn off a timer? Adult consequences for being careless and destructive, for ruining our holiday and embarrassing this family in front of our guests. Wilbur gestured toward the empty chairs where other family members had obviously been sitting before I arrived. Everyone had to leave because of the scene he caused. I looked at those empty chairs and felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. They'd had guests. People had been here, eating dinner and socializing while Amos sat outside freezing, and none of them had questioned it. None of them had said a word. "Grandpa, let's just go," Amos whispered behind me. "Please, I don't want to cause any more problems." The defeat in his voice broke something inside me. This boy, this smart, kind young man, had been beaten down so thoroughly that he thought he was the problem, that he was causing trouble by asking for basic human decency. "You're not causing problems, son," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You never were." I turned back to Wilbur, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson for what you did today." "I'm not apologizing for anything." Wilbur crossed his arms, chin raised in defiance. "And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline." "Then we're done here." I closed the phone and put it back in my pocket. "Amos, go get your things. You're coming home with me." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the little girl stopped crying for a moment. "You can't just take him," Leona said, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch me." I placed my hand firmly on Amos's shoulder, guiding him away from the dining room table and toward the stairs. "Go pack whatever you need. We're leaving." "Dad, you can't do this." Leona followed us, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just walk into our house and take my son." "I can, and I am." I kept walking, staying between Amos and the rest of the family. "Unless you'd prefer I call the authorities and let them sort it out." Amos led the way up the narrow staircase to the second floor, his steps quick and uncertain. I could hear Wilbur behind us, his heavy footsteps on the hardwood, but I didn't turn around. "This is kidnapping," Wilbur called out. "I'll have you arrested for kidnapping." "Good luck explaining to the police why my grandson was sitting outside in 5-degree weather for 4 hours. I reached the top of the stairs and followed Amos down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser. No heat vent that I could see, and the single window faced north, letting in the coldest air. It looked more like a storage room than a bedroom, and it was clearly the worst room in the house. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. Amos nodded, already pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them into a duffel bag. "Wilbur says the basement room is for guests, and the other upstairs room is for my sister." I noticed he didn't call her our sister, just my sister. Even in his own home, he was an outsider. "Take everything that matters to you," I said, standing guard at the doorway while he packed. "We're not coming back for anything." "Amos, think about what you're doing." Leona appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "This is your home, your family." "Some family," Amos muttered, folding a Dayton University sweatshirt into his bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze. Wilbur was just trying to teach you responsibility. By giving me hypothermia?" Amos looked up at his mother, and I could see 3 years of hurt and disappointment in his eyes. "Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink." "A glass? That's not normal." Leona's face crumpled. He has high standards. He wants you to be better." "He wants me gone," Amos said quietly, zipping up his bag. "And you know it." We made our way back downstairs, Wilbur waiting at the bottom like a bouncer. "You leave my house, boy, and you don't come back, ever." "Fine by me," Amos said, and I heard real strength in his voice for the first time all day. The front door was still hanging open from when I'd kicked it in, cold air pouring into the house and making the holiday decorations flutter like dying leaves. I could see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust visible in the frigid air. "Amos!" Leona called out as we reached the door. "Please don't do this. I love you." He stopped, turned back to look at his mother one last time. "If you loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen." We walked to my truck in silence, our breath visible in the freezing air. I threw his bag in the bed and helped him into the passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side. Through the front window of the house, I could see the family still standing in the entryway. Leona crying, Wilbur red-faced with rage, the little girl peeking around the corner. "You ready?" I asked, putting the truck in reverse. "I've been ready for 3 years," Amos said, pulling my coat tighter around his shoulders. I backed out of the driveway and onto the street, past the other decorated houses where normal families were probably finishing their Thanksgiving dinners in peace. The radio was still playing classic rock. The heater was working perfectly, and for the first time since I'd arrived, Amos looked like he could actually breathe. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said quietly as we turned onto the main road toward the highway. "I can't believe you came for me." "I should have come sooner," I said, meaning every word. "I should have seen what was happening. I tried to tell you, but I didn't know how." We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the familiar weight of family responsibility settling around my shoulders like Martha's favorite quilt. This boy needed protection, needed a safe place to heal and grow into the man he was meant to become. "Tell me about college," I said as we merged onto I-75 North. "What are you studying?" "Engineering." His voice got stronger when he talked about school. "Mechanical engineering, like you used to do at the factory." "Like grandfather, like grandson." I smiled, thinking about Martha and how proud she would have been. "We'll figure out the tuition. Don't worry about that." "Grandpa, I don't want to be a burden." "Son, you're not a burden. You're family, and family takes care of each other." My driveway looked smaller than usual, with both trucks parked side by side, but the house itself seemed to glow with welcome as we approached. I'd left the porch light on out of habit, and now I was grateful for that small beacon cutting through the winter darkness. "Home sweet home," I said, helping Amos carry his bag to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and warm air rushed out to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee and the lingering scent of Martha's lavender sachets. It wasn't much, a modest ranch with worn furniture and carpet that had seen better days, but it was paid for, and it was ours. "You remember where the guest room is?" I asked, flipping on lights as we moved through the living room. "Yeah, down the hall next to your room." Amos looked around with obvious relief. "It's so warm in here. Thermostat set to 72 year-round. Your grandmother always said life was too short to be cold in your own house." I showed him to the guest room and helped him get settled. There are extra blankets in the closet if you need them. The room was simple but comfortable. A double bed with one of Martha's quilts, a dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Photos of family gatherings lined the walls, including several of Amos at various ages. This had always been his room when he visited, and seeing him here now felt right in a way that nothing had felt right since Martha died. "I'll get some dinner started," I said. "Nothing fancy. I've got chicken in the freezer and some vegetables that need using up." "Can I help?" he asked, and I could see how desperately he wanted to be useful, to earn his keep. "Sure, but you don't have to. This is your home now, not a job." We worked together in the kitchen, and gradually the day's tension began to leave Amos's shoulders. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while he washed vegetables, and we moved around each other with the easy rhythm of family members who'd cooked together before. "Tell me more about what's been happening," I said as I seasoned the chicken. "Start from the beginning when your mother married Wilbur." Amos was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to decide how much to share. It started small, little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong, or left my shoes in the wrong place. Then it got bigger. How much bigger? He controls everything. When I eat, what I eat, when I can shower, when I can use the phone. Amos's voice got smaller as he continued. He made Mom choose between him and me, and she chose him. I had to stop seasoning the chicken for a moment and grip the counter. "What do you mean she chose him?" "Last Christmas, when you visited. Remember how I was quiet during dinner? Wilbur had told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless someone asked me a direct question, and Mom didn't say anything to stop him." The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd thought Amos was just being a typical moody teenager. I'd even joked with Martha about it later, saying kids these days didn't know how to make conversation. "Why doesn't your mother stand up to him?" "She's scared." Amos started chopping carrots with mechanical precision. "She told me once that if she leaves him, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that apartment complex where we used to live. She can't afford to take care of us on her own." I slid the chicken into the oven and started a fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar ritual of wadding newspaper and stacking kindling helped calm my racing thoughts. "Come sit with me," I said when the fire was crackling steadily. "Tell me about the good things. Tell me about school, about your friends." We settled into the comfortable chairs by the fire, and for the first time all day, Amos smiled. "I made Dean's List last semester, and I've got this friend Jake who's teaching me to play guitar." "Your grandmother always wanted to learn guitar." I pointed to a framed photo on the mantel showing Martha at age 20, laughing and holding an acoustic guitar. She said music was the language of the soul. I remember her saying that. Amos studied the photo with new interest. "I miss her." "Me too, son. Me too." We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories of Martha and making plans for Amos's spring semester. The house felt alive again with conversation and laughter, the way it used to when Martha was here to fill the quiet spaces. As we sat down to eat our simple but satisfying meal, I looked across the table at my grandson. Really looked at him. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. "We'll call the college tomorrow," I said, cutting into my chicken. "Make sure your financial aid is sorted out, and we'll look into getting you a part-time job if you want one." "Grandpa, you don't have to do all this for me." "Yes, I do." I met his eyes across the table. "That's what family's for." The phone rang just as we were finishing dessert, leftover pie I'd found in the freezer. The sound cut through our peaceful evening like a knife, and I could see Amos tense up immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench. Leona. The peaceful crackling of the fireplace was shattered by 3 sharp knocks on the front door. Not the gentle rapping of a neighbor or the hesitant tap of someone unsure. This was the authoritative pounding of someone who expected immediate compliance. Amos nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Grandpa?" "Stay behind me," I said, setting down my own cup and moving toward the door. The knocking came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by the sound of multiple voices on my front porch. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like predators waiting for their moment to strike, were Wilbur and Leona. "Mr. Burke," the lead officer called out. "Police, we need to speak with you." I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping my body positioned to block their view of Amos. "What can I do for you, officers?" Wilbur immediately stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "Officer, this man kidnapped my stepson. He broke into our house and took the boy without permission." The lead officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, held up his hand to quiet Wilbur. "Sir, we need to sort out this situation. Mr. Burke, is there a young man named Amos Green on these premises?" "Yes," I said simply. "My grandson is here." "He kidnapped him," Wilbur's voice rose dramatically. "Broke down our door like some kind of criminal and dragged the boy away from his family." "Is the young man here voluntarily?" the second officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Before I could answer, Amos appeared beside me, still wrapped in the blanket from the couch. His voice was quiet but clear. "I want to stay with my grandpa." Wilbur's face flushed red. "See? He's been filling the boy's head with lies, turning him against his own family." "What lies?" I stepped forward slightly. "The truth about how you left him outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. The truth about how you've been abusing him for 3 years." "Abuse?" Wilbur laughed, but it sounded forced. "I was teaching him responsibility. The boy ruined our entire Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn there are consequences for his actions." The first officer looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd broken up too many family disputes. "Mr. Burke, we're going to need everyone to come inside so we can discuss this properly." I stepped back reluctantly, allowing the officers to enter my living room. Wilbur followed immediately, Leona trailing behind him with her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like a woman who'd finally realized the true cost of the choices she'd made. "Now then," the officer said, taking out his notepad, "let's start from the beginning. Mr. Green, you claim this man kidnapped your stepson?" "Absolutely." Wilbur straightened his shoulders, putting on what I recognized as his reasonable authority figure performance. "I came home from work to find my front door broken and Amos gone. When I called around, neighbors said they saw an older man forcing the boy into a truck." "Forcing?" I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. "Officer, I rescued my grandson from child abuse." "That's what he keeps saying," Wilbur said, shaking his head sadly. "But the truth is, he's never approved of my marriage to his daughter. He's been looking for any excuse to cause trouble." The officer turned to Amos, who was standing close enough to me that I could feel him trembling. "Son, did this man force you to come with him?" "No, sir." Amos's voice was barely above a whisper. "He saved me." "Saved you from what?" Amos glanced nervously at Wilbur, then back at the officer. "From freezing to death on the front porch." The second officer looked up from his notepad. "Explain that." "I accidentally burned the turkey this morning. Wilbur made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for over 4 hours in 5-degree weather." "He's exaggerating," Wilbur said quickly. "It was maybe an hour, and he was dressed warmly." "An hour?" I stared at him. "Officer, I have witnesses. My grandson was sitting on that porch in a thin shirt and jeans when I arrived at 3:15. He'd been there since 11 in the morning." The first officer looked at Wilbur with new interest. "Sir, is it true you made the young man sit outside as punishment?" "Briefly, yes, but he's making it sound worse than it was." "In freezing weather? For several hours?" Wilbur's confident facade began to crack slightly. "Look, sometimes teenagers need firm discipline. His mother and I agreed that—" "Mom didn't agree to anything," Amos said, his voice getting stronger. "She just didn't stop you." All eyes turned to Leona, who had been silent throughout the entire exchange. She stood by the doorway like she was ready to run, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Ma'am," the officer prompted, "what's your version of events?" Leona looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever she said next would determine whether she stepped back to safety or plunged into the abyss. Her hands shook as she glanced between Wilbur's expectant face and Amos's hopeful eyes. "Mrs. Green," the first officer said gently, "we need to know what really happened today." Wilbur moved closer to his wife, and I could see the subtle intimidation in his posture, the way he positioned himself to loom over her, the warning look in his eyes. "Tell them, honey. Tell them how your father has been poisoning Amos against our family." The officer noticed it too. "Sir, please step back and let your wife speak for herself." Leona's voice came out as barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Amos did burn the turkey this morning." "And?" the officer prompted. And Wilbur was upset. Very upset. Her eyes darted to her husband, then quickly away. He said Amos needed to learn responsibility. By sitting outside in freezing weather? Leona nodded miserably. Wilbur said it would teach him to be more careful. How long was he outside, ma'am? Another glance at Wilbur, who was standing rigid with barely controlled anger. Since around 11? Until when? Until my father arrived. Her voice was getting smaller with each word. Around 3:15. The officer did quick math in his head. Over 4 hours, in 5-degree weather. She's making it sound worse than it was, Wilbur interjected. He could have come inside any time if he'd apologized and shown some remorse. No, he couldn't, Leona said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her. You locked the door. You told me not to let him in no matter what. The silence that followed was deafening. Wilbur's face went white, then red, then back to white. Leona, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, what are you doing? I'm telling the truth. She looked at Amos, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. For once in 3 years, I'm telling the truth. The officer leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Green, has this kind of punishment happened before? Yes. The word came out in a rush, like she'd been holding it back for years. He's made Amos sleep in the garage, in the basement. He's locked him out of the house overnight. Her voice grew stronger with each confession. He controls when Amos can eat, when he can shower, when he can speak at the dinner table. Leona, shut up. Wilbur's mask finally slipped completely. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built. What we've built? She turned on him with sudden fury. What have we built except fear and misery? Look at my son. Look what you've done to him. I watched Amos's face transform as his mother finally stood up for him. 3 years of doubt and self-blame seemed to melt away as he realized that someone else could see the truth of what he'd endured. The first officer stood up and moved toward Wilbur. Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. This is ridiculous. Wilbur backed toward the door. You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his delusional daughter? Based on the physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies about child endangerment, the officer said calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As they read Wilbur his rights and led him toward the door, he turned back to Leona, with pure venom in his eyes. You'll regret this betrayal. You'll lose everything, the house, the money, everything. You'll be nothing without me. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son, she said, and for the first time in years she sounded like the strong woman who'd raised Amos on her own. The door closed behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the 3 of us alone in my living room. Leona collapsed into a chair and started crying. Not the quiet, careful tears she'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from years of buried pain. Amos went to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. Mom, it's okay. It's over now. I'm so sorry, she whispered through her tears. I should have protected you. I should have been stronger. You were strong tonight, I said, settling back into my chair by the fireplace. When it mattered most, you chose your son over your husband. That took real courage. The fire crackled peacefully in the grate, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a real home again, not just because my family was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and justice was being served. Amos looked up at me from where he knelt beside his mother's chair. What happens now, Grandpa? Now we heal, I said simply. We take our time, and we heal. 4 months later, the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as Leona flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Amos sat at the table, reviewing his acceptance letter from Ohio State's engineering program. Full scholarship, he said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing it. They're actually paying me to go to school. That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard, Leona said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The part-time job at the local library had given her independence she'd never had before, and the divorce settlement had provided enough money for her to start over. Your grandmother would have been so proud, I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since Martha died, full of conversation and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Leona had moved in permanently after Wilbur's conviction. The guest room had become her space, and we'd converted the basement into a proper bedroom for Amos. Not a punishment cell like at Wilbur's house, but a comfortable retreat with good heating and windows that actually opened. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely?" Leona asked, joining us at the table. "I know you're used to your independence." "Independence is overrated," I said, meaning every word. "Family is what matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Amos doesn't burn down the kitchen when he tries to cook?" "That was one time," Amos protested, laughing, "and the fire was very small." The phone rang and Leona answered it. "Burke residence." "Oh, hi, Jake." Yes, he's here." "Guitar practice at 4? Sure, I'll tell him." She hung up and turned to Amos. "Your friend Jake wants to know if you're still planning to practice for the talent show." "The talent show?" I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't tell me about any talent show." Amos grinned, looking more like the confident young man he was supposed to be. "It's nothing big. Jake and I are doing an acoustic set. Couple of classic rock songs you'd probably recognize. I'll be in the front row," I promised. After breakfast, I found Leona in the living room, arranging new family photos on the mantel alongside the pictures of Martha. There was one from Amos's high school graduation that we'd missed because of the Wilbur situation, one from our fishing trip last month, and one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in years. "Any word from Wilbur?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "His lawyer called yesterday. The anger management therapy is going well, apparently, but he lost his job at the supermarket." She shrugged, not looking particularly sympathetic. "He's moving back to Cleveland to live with his sister." "Good. The farther away, the better." "I feel sorry for him sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember what he did to Amos, and the feeling passes pretty quickly." That afternoon, while Amos was at guitar practice, Leona and I worked in the garden, preparing the soil for Martha's vegetable patch. Spring was coming early this year, and there was something hopeful about planting seeds and planning for growth. "Dad," Leona said, pulling weeds with focused determination, "I need to thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day—" "You don't need to thank me," I said, turning over a stubborn clump of earth. "I was just doing what any grandfather would do." "No, you weren't. You risked everything to save him. You could have been arrested, charged with kidnapping. But I wasn't. Truth has a way of winning out in the end." She smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. "Martha used to say that. She was a smart woman. Smarter than me, anyway." That evening, we settled into our routine. Dinner together, followed by whatever game show or movie happened to be on television. It wasn't exciting or glamorous, but it was exactly what we all needed. Predictable, peaceful, safe. Amos had his guitar out, quietly practicing in the corner, while Leona worked on a crossword puzzle and I read the newspaper. Normal family activities that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. "Grandpa," Amos said during a commercial break, "I've been thinking about changing my major." "From engineering to what?" "Social work, maybe counseling." He set down his guitar and looked at me seriously. "I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through." I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost took my breath away. This young man, who had every right to be bitter and angry, wanted to use his experience to help others. "That's a fine goal," I said. "Your grandmother always said the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it." Did she really say that? She did, along with about 1,000 other pieces of wisdom I should have listened to more carefully. As the evening wore on and Leona dozed in her chair, Amos and I stepped out onto the back porch to look at the stars. The night was clear and cold, but nothing like that terrible Thanksgiving when I'd found him freezing on Wilbur's doorstep. "Ready for fishing season to open?" I asked. "Can't wait. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year?" "With your luck, probably catch a whale." We stood in comfortable silence, 2 generations of Burke-men who'd found their way back to each other through crisis and truth. In a few months, Amos would head off to college, and eventually he'd build his own life and family. But the foundation was solid now, built on honesty and protection and the kind of love that doesn't ask for anything in return. "Grandpa?" Amos said as we headed back inside. "Yeah?" "Thank you for coming to get me." "Thank you for being worth saving." The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. 3 people who'd learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters most, telling the truth even when it's hard, and protecting the people you love no matter what the cost. Martha would have been proud of all of us. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.